What's the worst reason someone got fired from your job? A husband and wife both worked in the same building. The security guys noticed some shenanigans going on in their car in the parking lot of the course of several days. HR gets a call, reviews the tape, and sure enough, they're having sexy time in the parking lot after lunch. HR calls them in and basically says, "Hey, you guys, this is no big deal, but could you guys not have sex in the parking lot? Somebody might see, and that would be bad." The husband acts bewildered and claims he doesn't know what HR is talking about, so they go to the tape. Sure enough, it's the wife and her supervisor going to town in the couple's car. The husband goes nuts and demands that heads roll. Wife and her supervisor are fired that day. Story 2. She didn't get fired, but I did watch over the slow course of weeks as an assistant manager talked her way into an official write-up and burned down any hope of career advancement she had over a pair of crappy boots. See, the place I was working at had a dress code. Only thing the company reliably provided was a shirt with the logo and your name on it. Pants, shoes, socks, etc. That was to be provided by the employee within certain parameters. The exception to this was delivery drivers, who received winter boots on the company dime. Since their job involves driving out to muddy construction sites, that makes sense. A female driver gets hired in at our store one day, and boots are ordered for her, the smallest size available in our catalog. Too big, so they sit in the back room for a few weeks. One day, the manager notices the assistant is now wearing them. He explains to her that he doesn't actually care about her taking the boots, but that she needs to not wear them to work. None of the people who report to her get their footwear provided by the company, and she makes more than they do. That's an optics of leadership thing. So don't wear them to work, but they're hers if she wants them. She comes in the next day wearing them. She explains that she doesn't need a pair of boots for home, as she has cute ones that she doesn't want to mess up at work. He reiterates that this isn't really the point he was making, and that she needs to either return them or not wear them at work. She emails his boss, thinking the manager's just being a banana. After all, one of the part-time delivery drivers, technically her subordinate, suggested she try them and take them. That's basically being given permission, right? Regional manager explains via email that she could, in theory, be fired for taking the boots. Realistically, no one cares, but the manager's right about the optics. Uses some specific analogy. Separately, he meets in person at the regional office with the manager for pre-scheduled review. Naturally, this bizarre situation comes up. Regional manager uses the same analogy on store manager, which prompts him to use it himself when the discussion comes up again the following day, with the assistant continuing to maintain that she was in the right. Consistent messaging from multiple layers of management? No, this is evidence that she's being ganged up on and conspired against. So she emails her boss's boss looking for an ally in her fight. He immediately wonders why the hell someone is trying to loop him in on a store-level disciplinary issue, and informs the layers of management below him that she needs to be written up for insubordination and return the boots to prevent any action from being taken her misappropriation of company property. So now she has a relatively serious disciplinary action in her file. Bad blood with 3 layers of management, and everyone who could promote her to running her own store, rightfully, thinks she's both a terrible leader and kind of stupid. She ended up quitting shortly after, story 3, for having a criminal record from a crime he committed 30 years ago. He was 50, had a rough childhood, and had just managed to get his life back together. He had worked for this company for close to 2 years and was by far the hardest worker in that factory. He would output at least twice as much product per day as the next best person. He took time off to get married, and regional management enacted a blanket rule, and the branch management said nothing. I learned a hard lesson that day. Companies have no loyalty towards their employees. He went on to work for their competitors 2 blocks away and was given a pay rise. So at least it worked out okay for him. Story 4. Our cart dude was an a-hole who always tried to provoke, usually random, people into fighting him. He'd accidentally knock displays over and then say, "I am not cleaning that up," and walk away. Management tried to fire him several times, but for whatever reason, the union always stepped in to protect him. He was finally fired and escorted off the premises after he threatened to hit the floral manager because she complained that he was bothering her. Story 5. Guy was fired for stealing from the register. We were all surprised since he was well-liked and a hard worker. A few months later, I was helping the manager clean behind the cash wrap. When we got to the register that employee used most often and popped out the cash drawer, we found a handful of 20s behind it. Turned out that bills were getting caught and dragged behind the till. Story 6. Dude at work was a known thief, just hadn't been caught by the supervisors. One day he's walking out with some zip ties sticking out of his lunchbox, and an engineer walking by asked if he paid for those. Dude said no. Then engineer brought it up to his supervisor in a meeting, and they fired the thief right then. It was fantastic. Dude lost a damn good $30 welding job with all the benefits. over $10 worth of zip ties. Story 7, me. I was working in a commercial landscaping job. My whole team smoked meth on site, and I almost took part. Kind of scared me that I'd come so close. So I stopped showing up, but didn't want to dob them in, since it would be obvious it was me. Not the most pleasant bunch of people. I got a call one morning from a furious manager saying if I didn't come in today, that I shouldn't bother coming back at all. Probably the best decision of my life. Story 8. Maintenance guy got fired at least 5 times for harassment. I lost count after that. Groped an employee, groped a customer. Called the girl working the portrait studio a Karen after she refused to give his number, among other things. He was also a crappy employee anyway. Always would go on trash rounds to get garbage from the registers, which wasn't something maintenance generally needed to do, mainly so he could flirt with the girls and get close to them. He'd like to go to the bars and check out the girls, would talk to me about it and make creepy comments. I wasn't interested in the normal things he talked about, so that was what was left. He was also off duty half hour before his shift ended every day, so sat in the break room. Also acted like he was working when he went to get lunch and clocked out after getting back. Would also take extra breaks amidst cleaning the break room. If we had free food, he would clean the back room constantly and stash food in the fridge. Was really annoying when management would spring for better food but try to limit it. His sister is a lawyer and brother is a social worker. The maintenance guy is a bit slow. The siblings would make a huge stink and threaten lawsuits, and Walmart would just hire him back. The dude is well aware of his actions though, so it's not an excuse. The thing that got him fired was crafting himself in the break room, making a big scene about not cleaning it up, and changed seats to finish his lunch. Story 9. Mechanic of 32 years got fired for disabling the RF entry card readers on the backside of the warehouse, so he could throw parties in it after warehouse hours. Nobody batted an eye until they mistakenly invited the plant manager to it. Story 10. Don't know if it's the worst, but it's certainly the dumbest. Small late-stage startup, small staff, account management, tech support, CFO, CEO. CEO is doing sales, but CFO, who is new, recommends we hire someone for that. So we do. Guy was a train wreck, regularly low-key, frequently made comments about the gay, and how it was okay for him to use slurs because he had a gay friend. Once laid into me in front of the CEO and CFO when I refused to lie to a prospective client about the viability of our product for their situation, and was shocked when the cause backed me instead of him. But sales guy didn't get fired for any of that. No, he got fired because on a trade show trip, he shared a cab back to the hotel with me and the CFO. On the way, a butt tipsy from dinner, he suggested we head to a men's club or get some escort. CFO and I decline. So sales guy whips out his phone, finds a girl on Craigslist and calls her up, haggles with her for the rest of the cab ride, talks her down in price, and gives her the name of the hotel. Next morning, we're back on the trade show floor with the CEO, and sales guy starts openly complaining that the prostitute never showed. Called her all kinds of names too. That he was fired for as soon as we got back to the office. Story 11. We had the New Year's party, alcohol involved, and a guy started hitting on a big boss HR who came to visit our country from the headquarters during that period of time. She tactically rejected him, but he started talking crap about her and wait for it. Then he ducking threatened her. Story 12. Guy at a big retailer drank a bottle of wine in his car during his break and then returned to work. He got the wine sleepiest and decided it was a good idea to nap in one of the display beds in the furniture depot. That probably would have been bad enough, but the thing is, nobody noticed him there. Security locked and armed the building and everyone went home. Fast forward to 3 a.m. and the alarms are going off and security was called in for an intruder. He had woken up and started wandering through the store. Security and cops just let him leave. Fast forward again until 8 a.m. and I, then the loss prevention manager, get called upstairs because the managers found a pair of shoes at the foot of a slept-in bed, which was also soaked through with urine. $4K in damages and the most awkward conversation later, he denied being drunk and almost got to keep his job on a technicality. Story 13. Got a few. Really stupid guy put his foot under edge of a bin of wire, weighing in at around 2 tons, as it was being set down. Said he wondered what it would feel like. Had a guy tell a woman, "Those some nice boobs you got there. What size are they?" Worked there 30 plus years. Lose your job in like 5 seconds. We have gas pumps at work for fleet and maintenance vehicles. A guy got a 2-gallon gas can of gas and set it by the back door. Took it at the end of the day. Next day fired for theft of company property. Pisser is, had he asked for it, they would have let him have it. This was 93-ish, so gas was about $1.30 a gallon. Guy came in off his gourd. Was a good kid for the most part, but had some personal issues. Was self-medicating. We have pretty good insurance and decent pay. Thought he was getting his crap together pretty good. Was a good welder and worker. It wasn't hard to tell he was wasted, was having difficulty walking in a straight line, Could barely stand up. Insisted he had to come in, can't miss work. He may have been out of PTO. Think leadership was trying to give him a break by not noticing. Plausible deniability. About 2 hours into shift security, and plant manager escort him up front and police arrest him. He apparently ran a woman off the road on the way to work. She was okay. Not intentionally, just due to being so out of it. That is just what happened, not excusing it, do stupid crap, it's on you. Don't know what happened to him. Nobody really knew him outside of work. Hope he got his life together. Dory 14. I was working on a ship a few years back, and we had one employee who was already on thin ice for a few small things. He was also within his 90-day new hire probationary period, so it was made clear to him that he should be very conscious of the rules. One of the big rules when working on ships is not to be late for the all-aboard time. It's a huge rule, and generally results in serious disciplinary action, usually termination. Anyhow, this guy is late for all aboard one day, and I get the call from security who are about to notify the captain that we're short one crew member. They call me to see if I know where he is, or know who might have been with him ashore, to see if they know anything about his whereabouts. Nobody knows where he is though, and they notify the captain. In these circumstances, it is the usual procedure to have HR get his passport and leave it with the port office so that the ship can still sail on time. There are massive fees for staying in port longer, plus fuel costs go way up if the ship has to go faster to make up for delays. So just as they're about to hand the passport over to the port agent, the guy comes strolling up to the gangway. When asked why he was so late, he said he would have been back in time, but he'd forgotten his jacket at the pub he'd gone to for lunch and didn't realize it until he was almost back to the ship. He decided to walk back to the pub to get the jacket knowing it would make him late, and knowing what the consequences would likely be. He could have just called the restaurant and asked them to hold it for him, as we were scheduled to be back in that same town only a week later. Instead, he lost his job and got sent home. Story 15, told to us by the AT security officer at my place of work at the time. Mary and Jane work in the same department and become friends. So much so, they do things with each other's families outside of work. Mary and Jane have a falling out and are no longer friends. Mary figures out Jane's password. It was something simple like Jane's kid's name, birth date, and starts logging into the company network under Jane's account and starts poking around. Jane is somehow unaware of this. Fast forward a few weeks. There's an actual problem where those users that are off-site are unable to dial into the work network remotely. Mary had the day off, was trying to log into Jane's account from home, but was unsuccessful. Mary actually calls the help desk, masquerading as Jane to report the problem of not being able to log in from home. Help desk tells Mary Jane that they're aware of the problem, but they do open a ticket. Maybe you know where this is going. Like many places, if you have a help desk ticket created for by you receive an email to your account saying, ticket number 12345 has been opened concerning, etc. Well, Jane is at work that day and receives that automatically generated email. Jane knows she didn't open a ticket, so she calls the help desk herself, asking what's going on. Tapes are pulled of the first phone call to the help desk that created the ticket. Interested parties listen to the tape, which I believe included Mary and Jane's manager. We were told Mary had a very distinct voice, so she was able to be identified easily. Mary gets pulled into a meeting the next time she's at work. One question asked of her, "Did you see Jane's pay stub?" Something you could see on our intranet. Mary answers she may have accidentally seen one or two. It took 4 or 5 deliberate clicks to get to seeing your pay stub, so not an accident. And Mary was immediately fired. Story 16. An employee came to me, supervisor, and told me that he wanted to give his 2 weeks notice because he didn't feel like he was growing enough in his position. It was a restaurant, and he had been there for about a month. I told him that it was fine and I'd phase him out of the schedule. I mentioned this to a friend of mine who was also a supervisor there. My friend's face turned red. He immediately called the guy to the office and basically said, "I heard you were giving your 2 weeks notice. You can just grab your jacket and get out right now." I was kind of shocked. Then after the guy left, my friend told me that one of the servers, who was a minor, was effectively being stalked by this guy. He had been parking his car behind the restaurant and waiting for her shifts to end. And the rumors were that he even followed her home a few times. I didn't know anything about it. Nobody had mentioned it to me. I sort of thought the kid was a decent guy for the most part. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, the same kid parked his car outside the restaurant and started prank calling the restaurant's number and a couple of the other staff that were working that day. I ended up having to call the police and had him removed from the property. Story 17. This guy at my old job had a crush on another one of our coworkers. It was really obvious, and as time went on, it got more and more intense and uncomfortable. It got to the point where she started having panic attacks at work whenever they were on shift together. So she approached management and asked if she could not be rostered on with him anymore. Management agreed and everything was fine for a while. The guy was a little depressed because he mysteriously never got to work with his crush anymore, but we thought it was good for him because He seemed to have dialed it back a bit and wasn't so obsessive. Unfortunately, we were wrong because when it somehow got back to him that she had requested to not work with him anymore, he went ducking crazy. He made a fake Instagram account in her name, adding all her coworkers and stealing pictures from her Facebook and uploading them with awful captions that contained super slurs and ducked-up escort-shaming language. It was so awful. Then he posted a picture of the CEO of the company and wrote a long, insulting, ranting caption, tagged said CEO, as well as a bunch of people from upper and middle management. Happily, no one ever for 1 second thought it was a real Instagram account, as it was so obviously a revenge-driven smear campaign. The main suspect was also pretty obvious. He was very quickly fired, and also banned from ever coming into the building again. Story 18. Worked at Lowe's Home Improvement for a year in high school. I used to work in the outside lawn and garden department. One day, they hired a second person for my department. He was a lazy guy, just stood around, barely did anything. By second week, he started signing up for all the opening shifts at 5 a.m. every day. I was fine with it because I honestly did not like going that early, and that shift usually had to stock up and move the products to the front. By the end of third week, I started noticing empty shelves and manager getting pissed off at me during the evening for the empty shelves and why the new stock wasn't put up. So I started restocking once my shift started, and again clean up at closing. Fast forward 5 to 6 days on a weekend, I go to the store with family to get some stuff. I walk by my department, and the other guy is not there. I checked the schedule, and he was supposed to be there. He even time-stamped in at like 4:50 a.m. I walk through the department, and the aisles look empty. It looked like they hadn't been restocked since I did it yesterday. I honestly thought he checked in and left. As I'm going through the patio furniture area to go the front, I notice one of the gazebo has its curtains closed. They're supposed to be open to show the furniture display inside. I go to open it and find the other employee sleeping inside. It all made sense why he signed up for all the morning shifts and nothing got done. Took a picture with my phone, showed it to the store manager who fired him on the spot. The manager literally walked up to him and woke him up to tell him he is fired. Story 19. Alright, so I worked at a wireless retailer, and it was privately owned. So we were a authorized retailer. Anyways, we had this one guy who usually worked at our other location, but would fill in randomly at our location to help out on busy days, usually the weekend. My store was also the home office for our CEO, who owned our 3 stores. My store had 4 employees in it. Me, another dude, and 2 girls. One Friday evening, I'm working with one of the girls, and here comes dude from the other store. He wasn't scheduled and showed up about 4 hours till closing time. I was due to get off in 2 hours, and she was to close the store. It wasn't a busy night, so we only scheduled one closer. I text CEO and ask him what's up. He is surprised as well, but said to let him go ahead and work to pick up some time, and I could go ahead and leave early. So I did. Come to find out, he came in so they could duck in the CEO's office. Turns out she knew his office room code, and when they closed the store that night, he made an advance on her and had consensual sex on my CEO's desk. He wasn't fired, but permanently moved back to his store that he was originally working at, trying to separate the girl and him. A couple of months later, he was closing with a new girl that was hired on at his store. He tried to abuse her and she pressed charges. We fired him and he was arrested. Story 20. I'm a director at a zoo here. More people than you might think, mostly interns and 1 or 2 full-time hires, have been fired for being unable or unwilling to deal with the stench, foulness of the job. Story 21. The one that bugged me the most was when I worked in a grocery store for half a year. I was a dumb teenager, so I didn't really know how things worked. Anyways, there was this guy who was an assistant manager. Really nice, really good dude. Worked hard, helped in every department. I helped people load groceries and get carts. He would give me waters and sports drinks. Just a really nice dude. We loved him. Customers loved him. He did schedules and all that, figured he'd be a manager in no time. Anyways, the manager of the shift we were on left, and we thought this guy would take over. We were pretty jazzed because we liked this guy way more than the manager. I think he thought so as well. Anyways, they bring in a manager from another store, and this dude sucked ass. Cared about everything. Jumped on the assistant manager about shift schedules. Just a real banana. The assistant manager definitely felt defeated. Anyways, he got fired for stealing water and sports drinks, the stuff he was handing out to us. What they didn't want to believe is that he bought them himself and kept them in the back. They thought he was stealing them off the truck and drinking on shift, which we all know was bullcrap. Anyways, he didn't contest it. He wanted to leave anyways, and we later found out it was because the store manager didn't like how much attention he was getting and how much we praised him, so she brought in a Nona whole shift manager. I left shortly after that because the job sucked ass, but I still think about that assistant manager 20 plus years later. Story 22. The manager didn't like her. That's it. Like, she was good at her job and hardworking. She was nice to everyone, including my manager. But the manager didn't care for her for no reason. He would always care about her towards me every chance he got, saying how she had zero experience serving and how she always left the food in the window for too long or didn't communicate with both, which was all B's. His excuse for firing her was that she was showing up late, which is the most hypocritical thing ever, especially considering the number of times I've had to sit out in the cold for like 15 minutes waiting for him to show up and let me in. He lives like a 5-minute drive away from the restaurant. The girl he fired had to drive from one city to another to show up to work, maybe a 30-minute drive. I thought she was cool as hell. We talked about music and anime and crap and had cool friends. And after he fired her, I handed in my 2 weeks. We're still friends and I hang out whenever I go back home during the holidays. As for that restaurant I worked at, I honestly really want to call out that restaurant and the manager that fired her. The manager especially is one of the most miserable hypocrites of a human I've ever met. But at the same time, I don't want to get myself into any kind of drama or crap while I've got enough on my plate as is. One day, me and my ex-coworker are going to make a statement. IDK when, but it's going to happen, I guarantee. Story 23. During the first year of COVID, we were given an hour-long protocol workshop by the department attorney at the county in working safely. We were an essential program. Everything from cleaning our workspaces after our shift, to opening doors, to wearing masks above the nose people, and how to sneeze. We were specifically warned that failure to follow the protocols would be a one-warning, second offense firing scenario. We all paid a lot of attention to his lecture. We all loved our jobs, for the most part. And of course, we were all pretty freaked out by the virus. As always happens, there's that one older person in the department who was very flagrantly ignoring the new COVID protocols, including wearing her mask under her nose, pulling it down to talk, and taking forever to flip her mask back up after drinking water, etc. She was constantly sneezing into her bare hands, then not washing them and coughing a lot, which caught everyone's alarmed attention. Our protocol was to sneeze either A, into a Kleenex under our mask, or B, into our elbows. After 3 complaints, I made one, not going to lie, she got into a screaming argument with the department lawyer about how her daughter was an LVN and knew better. He smiled tolerantly at her, nodded, then had her escorted out by security guards. Going rounds with the department lawyer at the top of your lungs over the word from your daughter, 1 to 2 year program, is a pretty dumb way to lose a job, Imho. County retirement is pretty choice around here. Story 24. A client's wife made a scene that one of our receptionists was sending her husband nudes. She came with printouts, was fired that day. I've never seen a woman so hell-bent on destroying another. Story 25. Neighbor's babysitter got fired because she left the kids, 3 kids under 10, alone in the house when she was scheduled to leave. Apparently, she thought the dad was still upstairs and she got paid weekly, so she didn't have any reason to talk to him after she had put all the kids to bed. But dad had left and the mom was late coming home. The mom about had a heart attack. I could hear her yelling from my house. Story 26. Okay, this is gonna sound crazy, but it just happened to me like an hour or 2 ago. I'm training with a work-at-home call center right now, and we use a Zoom-like program to communicate, and we typically mute our mics when we're not actively talking. So we were in kind of a just back from break lull before we got started, and someone forgot to remote their mic, and we could hear her talking to her husband, which is a noon, because you're technically supposed to be in a room alone, because credit info. So we hear them talking, and we're like, you mic check. Story 27. Back when I was 21, I got fired from the Green Apron Coffee Company, because I was drinking during the overnight shifts when we were drive-through only. Fair's fair. From my current company, I've seen 2 people fired for 6-figure overruns on projects. One was due to the person not really understanding any of the technical details of what they were managing, but they'd gotten by for years on having really good technical staff underneath them, so they only had to do admin. The other was supposedly a senior subject matter expert, but burned through over 100 DA of project budget to fill in a 3-tab worksheet that should have taken 2 weeks tops, and none of it was even correct. In both cases, there were some obvious issues with higher-up leadership as well that let those situations get to that point. But no one came out a winner. Story 28. Sleeping on the job. The kicker is, he was doing it every day, but nobody important noticed. But then, they talked about his performance and how he needed to get more done. He said that he can't because he needed his midday nap. Story 29. The person was lying about doing their job. When we go to locations, we have to get the signature of the person in charge on logs and submit them daily. Apparently, this person was just walking into places, getting the signature of some random employee, or just putting fake names, then immediately walked out without doing the job. They would hang out in their vehicle. Work cars have GPS trackers. For the amount of time, they said they were there on the inspection and repeat. Got away with it for months. Only way anyone found out was one of the places called complaining. They hadn't gotten an inspection all year. Supervisors pulled logs and went to the places and verified that the person had not done any of their work. Story 30. I worked at Target in the early 1980s. Not long after I left, Several employees were arrested because they'd been caught skimming merchandise. And one of them was the store manager's daughter. Just because she was his daughter didn't let her off the hook. The thieves had the charges dropped if they made restitution within a certain period of time, and in the case of the manager's daughter, this was over $3,000 in early 1980s dollars. Not my problem, not my monkeys. Later, when I was a practicing pharmacist, I worked with several people, and know of quite a few more, who not only lost their jobs, but their licenses as well. And in 2 cases, their freedom for stealing substances. And they thought they wouldn't get caught? Good luck with that. In recent years, I've heard several stories of middle-aged, long-term employees who were fired due to loopholes in the Family Leave Act, presumably so the employer could hire someone younger that they could pay less and get around in ways you can't do with people who have more life experience. Story 31. I worked at a phone store. When I was hired, they very clearly stated that client privacy is super important. The guy I was hired to replace had been fired on the spot because he had sold a contract to a client, thought the girl was pretty, and later that evening called her to ask her out. I'd say that's such a massive breach of privacy, he deserved to get fired over it. Story 32. He was due substances off his boyfriend's penis and bathroom. A customer came in and he said, "What, want some?" Dude probably wouldn't have even gotten in trouble if he used the employee bathroom. People ducked in there and nothing happened. Story 33. One of my employees went into the woods across from our building and started pleasure himself, claimed he was peeing. Except there are dozens of bathrooms in the building. He could have peed or do it. A client in the building saw him when she was walking to her car. In story 34. I used to work with a super nice old man who had been at that company for 30 years, and he was getting to retire at the end of 2016. He was 5 minutes late one day because he tripped and hurt his shin. He got fired. The story had a happy ending though. He sued the pants off the company, won a crap ton of money, and got a lot of the corrupt upper management fired, including the CFO. Story 35. Dude didn't get fired, but this is almost worse. He goes on a work trip. When he gets back, we have automatic scanners that peruse your hard drive. He had all sorts of cached adult film. So they pull him aside and give him a week suspension, no pay. Dude was married, and both were highly religious evangelicals with kids. So somehow he had to explain to his wife how he got a week of unexpected vacation and the loss of a week of pay, a week after coming back from a business trip. And he still was a self-righteous evangelical a whole the day he got back. Story 36. I worked on a sales floor for a software company. We had high turnover and always had young, inexperienced salespeople. Sales manager was sick of low productivity, low dials. And one of the reasons he attributed it to was people playing on their cell phone. He implemented a cell phone check-in system where you leave your phone and sign your name, and once or twice a day, they would randomly check the list of phones checked in and attribute a point, if you will. Points would be tallied over the month. Winner would get a prize. Think $10 towards lunch, 90-minute late start, etc. Now, this entire thing was completely voluntary. You did not have to ditch your phone, but then obviously you'd have no points, and therefore not win the prize. One newbie, probably 1 month in, decided he was going to game the system and put a calculator in the box instead of his phone. First check, he gets found out and fired on the spot. I seem to him and remember him being more concerned about how he was going to explain to his parents why he got fired from his first job. Story 37. Some background. I'm a mailman, and each week we have to deliver circulars, each individually addressed, to each of the customers on our route. This particular circular is very thick, even thicker than an actual newspaper. It's not so bad if you have a mounted, all-driving route, but if your route is mostly park and loop, walking route, you have to put over 20 of these papers in your mailbag each loop, and it actually becomes a fairly heavy load to carry all day. One day, in my large office, I was told one of my fellow carriers got fired. Why? Apparently someone on his route saw him throwing all his circulars in a condominium dumpster. Management checked it out. Did they dumpster dive? I'll never know. And he was quickly fired. The carrier union actually worked to get his job back, and I heard they succeeded. But then he resigned quickly after he was reinstated. Story 38. My team leader's husband, who works with us in the same company, stole a bunch of scrap papers to be sold in a junk shop. He, along with 2 other employees, hired a Jeep and a driver to transport the papers to their meeting place with the middleman they are in contact with, but the middleman have plans of his own. A drive-by shooting happened. The driver got shot, and the others run. When the police came, the 2 of them was brought to the precinct for questioning, and the other employee accompanied the hired driver to the hospital. When they were questioned about the scrap papers, the pair at the station and the one in the hospital gave different answer as to where the scrap papers came from. The police contacted the company, and they found out that the paper were indeed stolen. They went to jail. Company made them confess every accomplices they have inside the company in exchange for dropping the case. And then several other employees were fired because of this incident. Story 39. Early 1990s, at a defense contracting company, working for dud customers on an army base in the SE. Accurate and honest timekeeping is non-negotiable. We had these 3 guys, all of whom were creepier than Ghislaine Maxwell's basement, but they seemed to do their jobs without incident. They turned in timesheets reflecting a lot of overtime, but the government customer hadn't said anything about any problems, so we figured all was well, and we had 25 other sites on base to manage. Then the customer calls up to complain that these 3 guys haven't shown up for 2 or 3 weeks. They'd all still been turning in timesheets with 20-40 hours of OT per pay period, though. These guys were making in the neighborhood of $45, $60 an hour, which for the early 90s was some nice dosh. But once we found out they had falsified one timesheet, let alone several apiece, they lost their jobs and their security clearances and AFAIC their houses. And one of them went home to find out his wife and kids had bailed, all because they lied. Story 40. Posting his opinion about death on FB, in response to that Lincoln Park guy ending himself, turned out some guy from the higher-ups had someone in his family who end his life. Story 41. It was me. I worked at a local casino as a cash cage supervisor. GM called all the supervisors in about another company buying ours and started talking about raises for all other job titles except ours. I asked if we were getting raises as well. He looked at me and told me that I get paid enough for being so uneducated. Shocker. I wasn't uneducated. I was working this job just long enough to get up my seniority at my hospital job to keep a steady flow of shifts. I then went back to work and my coworkers asked me about the meeting and I told the truth about what was said to me. I was fired that day and then the GM calls me the next week asking why I'm not at work. Story 42. Let me preface this by stating that I had top scoring reviews and have never been in trouble. Brain-dead management hired this bipolar demon who was nothing but red flags since the beginning when she was late for her interview because she was running errand. We all hated her and made complaints which management immediately dismissed. At the end of her first month, I complied a 7-page letter about her misconduct, and that was just towards me. My coworkers could have their own, but they were afraid of retaliation, foreshadowing. I submitted my letter, then was pulled in for harassment towards her. Note, first day she accused me of being an asexual because I didn't have a girlfriend, which she got away with. She kept getting away with everything and even past her 90 days. One day, the GM asks how the demon is doing. I say terrible, and now she is blocking doorways. The next day, I was pulled in and terminated for being hostile. Story 43. I used to work for a major pharmacy chain. We had a great assistant manager who got promoted to manager at a store in a nearby city. He spent a lot of money moving, getting a new apartment, etc. He then had car trouble. He texted the district manager about having no money to fix his car. The DM tells him to take money out of the safe and pay it back later when he got his moving expense money. Shortly after, another employee noticed money was missing from the safe. Instead of backing up the manager, the DM had him arrested for theft. Why, I don't know. The DM may have realized he could have gotten into trouble himself for telling the manager to take money from the safe. Anyhow, the manager stayed fired, but the text messages kept him from being charged with theft. In the typical, unfair corporate world, the DM got a promotion instead of being fired himself. Duck you, Jeremy. Story 44. New kid got hired with me as a furniture delivery driver. We had to go get our truck checker out because we had Muro coolant. They tell us the truck is ready to go, and we go pop the hood and there is zero coolant again. We checked the reservoir and it was cracked and leaked out again after they filled it up. Instead of just telling them, he goes in yelling at the shop workers like it was his own personal truck. The shop called and complained, and he was fired the next day. We were getting paid to sit at this mechanic shop, and it's a company vehicle. IDK why he was so upset, but it cost him his job. He just moved out on his own and completely screwed himself over. Story 45. We had both of our day shift fish cutters fired on the same day for pissing into the fish room floor drain together. This drain had a filter used to catch fish scales that the janitors had to clean every day as part of their rounds. I was one of the few who knew because I got pulled to help the department until they could hire and train new cutters. I know about the filter because I trained the janitors, all great hardworking guys at that. How to do it, story 46. I once had a coworker who was fired for playing Christmas music in the store. The big boss man had a policy of not having music playing in the store because it was unprofessional. I think this rule was really stupid, but that's beside the point. One day at work, my coworker's talking about how you can use a bowl as an amplifier for a cell phone speaker. A few days later, after having played Christmas music all throughout the shift, my coworker forgets to put the bowl away. I guess one of my managers checked the camera footage and that was the end of it. I'm pretty sure they were just looking for a reason to fire her, but the reason that they chose was pretty dumb in the grand scheme of things. I hate Christmas music, like it makes me irrationally angry, and had asked her several times to not play it, but to my credit, I wasn't no snitch. Story 47. I work at a medically supervised substances and alcohol detox. One of our nurses, an RN, made multiple medication administration errors. Gave someone strictly detoxing from alcohol Subutex, gave double Valiums, etc., etc., as well as talking about patients to other patients. Now, that alone doesn't sound too crazy for why she was being fired. In fact, it was necessary and would have led to termination of anyone. But when she found out she was being fired, she lost it. She went around to certain patients and told them they'd never get clean sober, they were going to OD pass, and then told everyone she hated their ducking guts and she hopes she never sees another soul again. Then she went outside, lit a cigarette, and began blowing the smoke into the windows. We're a strict no-smoking facility. It was brutal. Story 48. Worked for a local food delivery service. New guy decided, for whatever reason, to take medics for the first time right before his shift started. He spent 2.5 hours trying to complete one delivery that only had about 2 miles to go, kept going towards his second delivery pickup, and being told to drop the first beforehand. The customer finally saw him sitting in his car, called several times to say that he's either just sitting there in the car or digging through the trunk and finally pissed in their yard facing their house. Customer's order was replaced and they were refunded. Since independent contractors are not technically employees, the business ended the partnership. I helped clean the delivery bag when he dropped it off. Japanese food, including sushi, was all over. Looks like he dropped the food bags into it. Story 49. One woman got long COVID and a note from her doctor saying she couldn't come into the office for some respiratory sensitivity thing. We have all worked from home for 2 years and are now coming back full-time. Bosses said she had to come in. They can't fire her for being sick, so they wrote her up for insubordination because she was using too much bold font in her emails, and it came across as rude. They are now firing her because she has a record of insubordination. Story 50. I have a story about someone that didn't get fired. Cleaner who came into work to his 3 a.m. shift and came in directly from a night out at a local salsa club. Proceeded to start his shift by cranking salsa music on blast on the loudspeakers. Continues into the kitchen and starts to make a scrumptious breakfast. Before said breakfast could consumed, decides that enough is enough and passes out at a table. Wakes up to a manager rustling him awake at 9 a.m., complete with salsa music still on blast, and breakfast endeavor burned to a ducking oblivion. Did not get fired. Owners were insanely nice, despite said breakfast potentially burning down their business. Needless to say, there was no more salsa dancing before work time. Made for an insanely funny story, all is good that ends well, I guess. Story 51. Waked in on a guy chugging from a fifth of Smirnoff in the break room at the movie theater we worked at. He told me he had drank a bit more than half of it. I didn't rat on him, but I didn't really have to after he vomited in the concession booth. Story 52. She was drinking on the job. Would frequent a local bar or restaurant every day on her lunch. The owner went for lunch one day and saw her belligerent at the bar. Instantly fired. Packing her office by the time lunch was over. Story 53. I am a director of an hospital. I fired someone because he committed abuse in my hospital. I immediately reported him to the police. Luckily, he now lives a life in an isolation cell. I still hate myself for not preventing that crime. Story 54. Stole a ton of money from our workplace. We worked at a gas station, and he would incorrectly count the money in the till and pocket the rest. Also would delete security footage off the computer. Took a long time for them to figure out it was him. There was a warrant out for his arrest after, and I'm not sure what happened after that. What's crazy is he was always super nice, and you would never suspect him of it. Story 55. He was in bad financial straits and had debt collectors harassing him at work. We had a department shared phone line, so about 5 or 6 of us would randomly get calls intended for him. He got fired because we couldn't get work done under those circumstances. But he couldn't pay back his debts if he was harassed out of his paycheck. Story 56. I don't know about worst, but I got fired from my corporate job for making fun of vegans in a Slack conversation. The company is a very popular salad chain. It was the height of George Floyd, and a customer had sent an email asking, "Why do you still serve real chicken when vegan chicken exists?" And as a joke, I said, "Tell them because normal people eat normal food." There was a vegan in the chat. They complained about being offended by my use of the word normal, implying vegans were abnormal. And because everything was super sensitive, from the protests they deemed what I said offensive speech, and they have a zero tolerance policy for offensive speech. Story 57. Used to work at a grocery store. One guy who had been there a couple of months and worked mornings, usually 5 a.m., 1:30 p.m., went home at 9. Nobody noticed until close to 11, so they called him back in. He gave some excuse about thinking he had a short shift that day, and when they told him he was getting a verbal warning, which didn't mean very much considering we were unionized, he threatened to cut my manager with a box cutter. Police called. Dude was never seen again. Story 58. worked at a large corporation, and we had a software development contractor working with us. After he had been with the company for 6 months or so, it noticed that his desktop had an unusually large amount of network traffic coming out of it. Found out that he had installed a web server on it and was serving up some fairly hardcore adult film to a large number of people in the company. When his manager confronted him with this and told him he was fired, he said the company couldn't fire him because the corporate web proxy let him download it in the first place, so it must be okay. He was walked right out the door. Story 59. She had head lice so bad they were laying eggs in her hair and inside her eye socket. She refused to stay home and get medical attention, and eventually had to be terminated because she kept coming to work and causing the rest of the line to be quarantined and tested, disrupting production on 4 different occasions. Story 60. For literally following the owner's instruction. The restaurant we'd been working at was going through an expansion. Owner ignored many concerns from management and was trying to hold a meeting about how things are going to be around here now, when a staff member began to complain. Owner's response: if you don't like it, you can ducking leave. Employee left. Owner has surprised Pikachu face and calls out, "You're fired!" Turns out employee made more money off unemployment than the rest of us did trying to prop up a new restaurant with weird new rules. Later on, I'd get fired as well, and that was how I got my PS4. Story 61. Worked in a hospital doing morning rounds for blood drawing. This guy got hired. It was his first day, and he was training with one of the team leads. He was only able to get blood from 2 patients out of 50 pounds. Demonstrated he did not know how to use any of the needles, tubes, or devices we use. He used the bathroom between almost every patient and was sweating so bad it was soaking through his scrubs. Come to find out, he was lying about having any type of license or certification. Not sure how the hell he got hired without it. Nevertheless, he did not make it to day 2 of employment. Story 62. Job. I had about 10 years ago, an emergency meeting gets called, and we all shuffle into the main meeting room. We're greeted by the CEO of the company, legal team, and a couple of detectives. Apparently, the vice president of sales had taken it upon himself to sell over $500K of product at 0 cost and collect money on the side from the recipients at a heavily discounted price. He was a no-call, no-show for 3 days before all this went down, so my guess is he knew the walls were closing in and made a run for it. Story 63. This dude got yelled at by a manager. He apparently ran to the back and said, "I got to blow off some steam." They found him in the storage room doing the one-handed shuffle. This was at a McDonald's, by the way, story 64. Maintenance guy for a McDonald's finished his shift, clocked out, and left, as usual. Someone at the regional level visiting fired him for leaving, even though he was done with his duties and his scheduled time had ended, and he clocked out properly. That store later lost the entire morning and overnight shift back to back. Story 65 was a temp driver for a food bank. All the drivers and distribution supervisors had a big group text to keep everyone in the loop on what was going on. One of the white drivers accidentally sent a blatantly awful text message that was meant for someone else at 9 p.m. to the work group chat, where 90% of the drivers were black. The entire distribution team was in an uproar when I showed up for work the next morning. Story 66. I was fired from a job because I put soft serve ice cream in a fountain drink one day. Soda was free, drink as much as you like, but the ice cream is apparently stealing company property. Contrast that to my assigned roommate, who worked there as well. He was caught stealing cash out of the register and just got moved to the retail floor. Story 67. A friend of mine worked at a network equipment company. A coworker of him was sent to a customer to fix a problem. Sometime later, there was another problem, and the customer asked for support again. "Please send someone to fix my problem, but please not that guy again." That guy hears about it, and on the next day, he drives to the customer's site, points a gun to his head, and asks him why he doesn't want to see him again. This is Germany, where you can't own a gun or any other deadly weapon for no reason. Story 68. Refused the COVID vaccine. This was at a former employer. Dude was a caretaker for a non-profit mansion museum. He and his family lived on the top floor. Gave up cushy job and place to live with his fam and mother-in-law. Also, his cousin was on a ventilator for 4 months or so from COVID. He's a big dumb. Story 69. I was working in a restaurant in Dublin, and a girl started there, but she would always come dressed up fancy. We worked as waiters. But the manager found out there was an escort and simply stopped giving her hours. She was a nice girl, and I think whatever she does outside shouldn't interfere on her job there. I don't have a lot of details, but that's what I heard from some friends there. Story 70. I was a manager at a coffee shop kiosk in a grocery store. One of my employees got fired after being there for 3 months because she didn't pass her background check. She was told it went through just fine. She was hired even though they never got it back. She was a hard worker, reliable, and was super flexible. I'm still mad about it almost a year later. Story 71. She reported a guy she thought was stalking her. He was also a registered offender. She ended up transferring I as her union representative, stuck up for her, got her a meeting with the vice president of the company. She was transferred, got 4 extra hours of pay. Me, it came time for a promotion. I was not interviewed, told I was a waste of time, and the person hired had less time on the job, less schooling, and I trained him. Story 72. Tried to sell his federal access card to a pawn shop. No big deal. Just a clearly marked government card with a number on the back for reporting if it was found, with his face and name on it, that gives access to the social security numbers and other personal information for a few million US citizens. No big deal at all. Fortunately, it was physical access only, in a secured office, to devices only about 10 people had access to. He was kind of stupid. We're clearly still not hiring the best to do government work. Story 73. There was a big mass shooting in my city, the largest in US history. 2 days afterwards, there was a guy at my work who was walking down a hallway when a door slammed shut loudly. He thought he was funny and yelled, "Active shooter!" It scared a bunch of people, and he was let go that day. Story 74. A customer had case of medical marijuana, edibles, and other stuff of that nature, all legal here in Oklahoma. They accidentally left it in a cart when they left. A sketchy older guy we hired early in the craziness of the pandemic when we suspended background checks just to get bodies. He became a janitor. He found it and told an equally sketch cart clerk. He took it out to his car instead of reporting it to the manager or LP. He was gone that day. Story 75. He legit felt he wasn't good enough and wasn't doing good, while in fact, he was doing great and everybody wanted him to stay and tried to tell him how good he was doing. Guess problems with yourself are the worst kind ever. Story 76. Kid walked in extremely hungover from the night before and had been repeatedly told to go home before even getting to clock in. He clocked in and took a few steps in the back to puke absolutely everywhere. Needless to say, sent home fired on the spot while we had to call to get it cleaned. Story 77. Sleeping on shift. I don't mean accidentally falling asleep in the break room or something, but actually finding a place where he would be undisturbed and conking out for most of the day. They fired him on the spot, apparently. This was at my job in high school. Maybe not the worst reason ever to get fired, but it's one of the worst ways to go about keeping a job if you want to look at it from that lens. Story 78. I worked with someone who was fired for not packing an item in her boss's luggage that he never asked for. The reason they gave was that she should have known if she was the right person for the job. Story 79. Not the worst, but the lamest. One coworker was fired and told, "We are restructuring the department." Yet in the next 6 months, no one else was hired or fired. Turns out she was negotiating a better job offer through the company email. Giga Chad Story 80. Working at a pretty big publishing house. A friend gets recommended for an internship under a prestigious illustrator for editorial work. And this guy hardly ever takes interns. She's 5 hours late the first day because she spent her entire night looking at and tweeting about characters from it having sex. I know this because I followed her on Twitter. Lost a very rare opportunity because of adult film. Story 81. Ooh, I got a good one. I freaking got a glass of water after bussing a table. That's legitimately the reason my employer gave me. Just sat me down at the end of my shift and said I'm fired because I got a glass of soda during my shift. I explained it was water and showed them my cup, and they told me I shouldn't have done so during my shift. Story 82. I had a friend named Elijah. He definitely was brave. He would always find a way to slap out girls' butts at work, but no one would ever say crap about it. One of those girls happened to be the general manager's daughter. Apparently, he took that girl to the bathroom during their break, and you can guess what happened from there. They were both fired. Story 83. I got fired for giving my employee meal to another employee in a different department. My department was the kitchen, and they were on the retail side. I really suspect it's cause I had dated 2 employees there, but there wasn't any policy, so that's the only thing they could pin me for. Terminated for stealing. Story 84. A guy threatened him and approached him. He was fired because he stepped off his standing forklift and turned around to face the guy who threatened him. He left his workstation. Story 85. We were nurses at an emergency department. His wife used to work at the ICU until she developed a heart problem. She arrested twice at home, and he had to perform CPR. Both times he missed a lot of work due to her rehab. Third time she coded, he didn't have to do the CPR that time at least. They fired him for missing too much work. Story 86. Finance lead, on their first week, sent all employee W-2 forms to a phishing scammer pretending to be the CEO. Immediately resigned, but obviously would be fired. Story 87. Needed to meet credit card quota. Was a newbie. Asked manager on duty if she could call her husband and ask him to apply for one. Manager gave permission. Husband gave permission. Employee fired because it was fraud that the card wasn't applied for in person. Manager had no consequence. Story 88. A new hire that was about 2 weeks old came to work during the night shift saying his car broke down and if he could sleep in the locker room till the morning. Thing was, he came in all wet from pissing himself while being drunk, telling the supervisor his car broke down. He didn't make it out of probation. Story 89. My grandfather was more or less a loan shark that worked under the guise of title pawning. To give you an idea of his character, my grandfather was the most sexist, drunk, shady individual you'd ever meet. The worst reason why he fired someone? They had the audacity to suggest he shouldn't openly drink a martini in front of customers. Story 90. He caught COVID. Boss told him to come in anyway. He argued with the boss, who said, "Come in or you're fired." So he went in and told his coworkers. All the ones who had already had it stayed. Everyone else walked out on the spot. Kicker was that his boss caught COVID that day and was dead within 6 days. So boss essentially fired himself. Bosses of Reddit, what is the most messed up reason you have had to fire an employee for? Story 1. I've waited for this moment for a year now. I work in an oil and gas plant, which is located a couple hundred kilometers, I'm Canadian, north of civilization. We have giant complexes that house over 3,000 workers at a time. We have our own airport here and planes that we use to fly workers home on their week off. These complexes are set up like hotels, with a long hallway with 42 rooms in each wing. Each one of those wings contains a washroom with 8 tiny washrooms inside of it. In each of the 8 rooms, there is a shower and a toilet. Okay, now that I've prefaced the story, on to the explanation of events. One day I get a call from a very angry cleaner who had, upon opening one of the stalls, been greeted a big steaming turd which was in the shower. She was obviously very upset, and rightfully so. That particular wing housed a section of my 380 employees, chalking it up to a drunken accident from the night before, or someone who had an accident. We apologized to the cleaner and went on with the regular workday. The following morning, the same cleaner called again to tell me the same story. Crap in the shower. Amazingly, the toilet is located literally less than 1 foot away from the shower door. So this whole shower crafting incident was the act of an intentional shower crafter. For the next 6 days, the guys in the dorm and the cleaners would open this door to find one of the shower stalls full of crap. This happened so frequently, the guys would laugh and refer to morning showers as a game of crap roulette. I spent 4 days intricately tracking the occurrences of the reported shower crapping and cross-referencing all of the 380 employees' shift schedules, sick days, vacation time, etc., and narrowed it down to one guy. We set up a sting, an Operation Stinky Shower, and caught the guy sneaking out of the stall after leaving a fresh turf smeared all over the walls and floor of said stall. I obviously had to let him go. It was the most awkward termination I ever had to do. As he was a union worker, our policy states that there needs to be a representative of his union, an HR person, and myself present for each termination of employment. I had to explain to a 47-year-old man in front of his friend and neighbor at home, as well as the very attractive 34-year-old female HR rep, that he was being released from employment because of repeated defecation in the public showers. His response? Doesn't everyone crap in the shower? I do it at home all the time, and just use the handheld shower thingies to rinse it down the drain. There was no shower wand thing in camp, so how was I supposed to get rid of it? This was the great shower crafting incident of 2011, and has consistently resulted in me winning the craptiest firing ever award. Story 2. I wasn't the boss, but a former coworker got fired for looking at pictures of walruses for hours on end. I came in one day and couldn't figure out why the internet wasn't working. Boss gave me the new password and fired the other woman a few hours later. Story 3. Plagiarism. 25 plus times out of 30 articles that she had written. She was a recent college grad, quite bright, an excellent writer, but utterly lacking in confidence. So instead of writing articles on her own, she largely copied them from other places online. At first, I thought she had done it a few times. I met with her and she claimed it was the result of sloppy procedure, i.e., she'd cut and paste content and then planned to rewrite it but forgot to do so. I assured her that we really liked her work and hoped she'd be working with us forever. Something made me delve into it further that night, and I discovered that it was rare for her not to plagiarize. I fired her at 9:05 a.m. the next day. The good news? She apparently learned her lesson and is now a highly successful independent blogger. Story 4. Hotel Inspection Day. The franchise guys that get to decide if you meet the standards to keep the brand name. Maintenance guy gets caught eating and watching TV, sitting on the bed with his shoes off and drinking a beer from the bar. Then he just goes to another room to do the same thing. And that's another random room they inspected while he was still there. And then he did the same thing again. Then he had the nerve to ask who'd I do when I had the talk with him later that day. Story 5. At an ad agency, sitting in a meeting with a 10 mil account client. For my agency, the owner, president, account director, creative director, media director, me, account manager, and my coordinators in the room. My coordinator was this young bird right out of college, very ambitious with lots of energy, but very outspoken and brash. I've had to speak with her a number of times about keeping quiet in meetings and focusing on taking notes and waiting until afterwards to ask questions and not argue with anything anyone says in the meeting or make any grossed out faces. Out of habit, whenever anyone said anything she didn't agree with, she'd make this disgusted face as if someone just farted in her mouth. She always cried when I had to rein her in and remind her that she was overstepping her boundaries. Hawk Ward. Before the meeting, I had a quick recap with her that she is there to listen and take notes, and that not even I was going to do any talking, but merely to support the directors. Anyways, during the meeting while we're talking about target audiences, she decides to chirp up and talk about herself and her group of friends, about how they should be who we decide to target, and she starts going into detail about the reasons why. And in doing so, she casually mentions taking recreational substances and hooking up on one night stand. I put my hand slowly over her notebook to try to signal to her to stop, but she had already gone off the rails. The owner finally stepped up and basically told her to shut up right in the middle of it, and she started crying. It was so embarrassing. The meeting ended quickly after, and we agreed to finish it at the client's office the next day instead. After the meeting, I sat her down in another room with, and she started crying to me about how pissed she was that the owner made her look like an idiot in the meeting, and that she was so mad that she was threatening to quit. I tried to get her to understand why the owner had to step in and keep her in line, but she just couldn't be reasoned with. She was fired by the end of the day, and in the exit meeting was crying and was saying that we didn't have a good enough reason and was begging for a second chance. It was brutal. Story 6. I had a soldier with a tattoo that went up the back of his neck, got a waiver when he joined in late Zero. In '02, or thereabouts, the Army changed its tattoo policy so that all waivered tattoos had to be reevaluated, and if not deemed in reg, the soldier either removed it or was discharged. This kid was a good troop, no discipline issues, and I'd recommended him for promotion to sergeant. His tattoo was a tribal-ish design of his dead kid's name. Brigade Command Sergeant Major had a hard-in for anything outside the new criteria to be removed or the soldier was kicked out. Kid wouldn't change it because it meant something. He got kicked out faster than anyone I've ever seen. Me, my platoon sergeant, and the first sergeant all wrote letters of support, but to no avail. He struggled for a while after getting out, but went back to college and got a job in it, I think. Haven't talked to him since '05. Good guy. Story 7. We hired a young woman to work in our shop, and she was supposed to start at 10 Monday morning. She didn't show up. We weren't able to get in touch with her till the afternoon when she told us that she had forgotten that she had a new job. Because she was a friend's niece, we gave her a second chance. Tuesday morning, and she didn't show up. She phoned us at 11 to say she would be right in, and could she have Wednesday off, because today is my sister's birthday, and we're going to get wrecked. We told her not to bother coming in. Story 8. Guy worked for me, was really immature, and I received a lot of complaints from other divisions and departments that he would not stop furiously and randomly air humping, pelvic thrusting. Not always at people, sometimes just at nothing. It was disturbing to find this out. Maybe he thought as long as he didn't do it in my office or workspace, he'd get away with it. Story 9. I used to work in supported living for people with mental disabilities. One night, an employee, Kim, at one of our houses decided to take her client, Jill, out to the bar. Jill is a 35-year-old woman. She also has some mobility problems. She doesn't drink. Kim proceeds to get blackout drunk. Jill ends up getting pregnant. Kim goes to jail. Jill has her baby, but is not given custody because of her mental health and mobility problem. She is allowed 2 visits per month, supervised by a staff person and the adoptive mother. At the time, I was the supervisor at another house and didn't have to deal with any of this, but it sickened me. I'm not in that line of work anymore, not because of this incident. Story 10. McDonald's general manager here. Our store opens at 5 a.m. and closes at 12 a.m. As such, our openers arrive at 4 a.m. and our closers are normally gone by 2 a.m., plus or minus a few hours depending on the amount of pre-close finished, which is due to business. Recently, we have begun hiring for the summer to fill out our roster, and we have a couple new closers. One of them is the escortiest chick I've ever seen. She came to her interview in clothes I wouldn't dream to let my daughter look at in a department store. I have a manager specifically over hiring and customer interface, and how he let her slip through the cracks I will never know. Anyways, I arrived promptly at 4 a.m. and noticed that all of our equipment in the office has been sloppily rearranged on our desk, and that some of the equipment was missing. I pulled up last night's time punch record and saw that closers didn't leave until 3:30, which is ridiculously late due to the low amount of sales we had in the late hours before. So I then went to disarm the alarm system and noticed that all the camera lights were off on the way there. Went back in the office and looked at our security page. All cameras had been disabled at 1:45. At 1:40, all closers had left the store, except Bimbo and my closing manager. Fortunately, it is impossible to disable the office camera, but my closing manager didn't know that. Pulled up the record to find him boning the chick in the office of my store, called him, told him he needed to get in the store right away. He came about 10 minutes later with his mistress in the car. I pulled him into the back and told him what I found and how I uncovered his scheme. He begged me not to fire him because his pregnant wife would leave him. The scumbag then tried to spin it off that he had been abused by a 100-year-old girl, pulled Barbie in and talked to her alone. She told me he gave her $500 stolen from our deposit, showed me the cash, and then told me that she would give me the same deal for free if I promised not to tell. I promptly sat them both down, didn't leave them alone, and called my regional manager. After I told them the story and revealed I had recorded the conversations with them both via smartphone in my pocket, I live in a single-party consent state. Although I didn't intend to use it as evidence, I wanted to cover my ass when they predictably started lying to save their own skins. They were both fired on the spot and are banned from all Raleigh region McDonald's, and they are soon having charges pressed against them. By far the craziest thing I have had happen with my employees. The majority of them are intelligent and hardworking, and I would go to bat for them. Go through great effort to defend them any day. Story 11. On Monday, I had to fire an employee for beating of a customer. Even though our store is on lockdown from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., and all transactions are done through the walk-up window, the employee unlocked the doors and went outside and beat this guy. The video footage pretty brutal. Now he wants me to write up a form and say we just laid him off. Anyway, that was my Canada day. Story 12. I work at a 7-Eleven and we had this crazy customer, Lewis, that would come by every night. He thought he worked there and would stand outside saying hi to everyone all night. He was entirely harmless, but every once in a while, he would come by drunk and instead of saying hi, would say nice titties, regardless of gender or age of who he was saying it to. My coworkers would try to get him to leave, but he wouldn't. Before they would call the cops, I would just stick my head outside, bluntly tell him he's fired, and he would just walk home. He could be in mid-sentence and just stop what he was saying and walk home. He was awesome. Story 13. When I was in the Navy, I once saw a cook, mess specialist, being escorted off a neighboring ship in cuffs. Found out he had been their night baker and was caught making women out of dough and having his way with them before turning that same dough batch into the bread, cakes, and muffins for their crew. I was told that his custody was mostly for his own protection as that ship's crew didn't appreciate his secret ingredient. Story 14. We are looking for a new secretary for our QA department, so he hired this lady. Her CV was quite impressive as she worked in the document and data control department of another company for 7 years, which is what we wanted. We thought she would be mature because her age was over 40. I guess we made an ass of ourselves because we were dead wrong. First up is that she would never stop complaining about the most trivial things. It got so bad the prankster in me decided to play a game with her where I would stick stickers on her face every time she complained. On the first day, I had dispensed about 6-7 stickers. She would constantly brag about how her husband dotes on her like she was a spoiled princess, and she never did any cleaning or housework and acts proud of it. She had a disagreement about the safety rules where if there was an emergency, we should make our work area safe and then leave. She said we should just drop what we are doing and not bother to make our working area safe because she felt it wasn't her responsibility, and in that 2 seconds she took to make her area safe, the ceiling would collapse on her. I asked her what if the person was a welder? Should he just stop and not make her area safe and leave the welding torch on? She actually said, yes, that is not his problem, it is someone else. I got so fed up I took her to the she-dept and had the employees there, including an actual safety officer, explain it to her, but she still refused to listen. In our company, when we send out documents, we would need to prepare a form called a transmittal for proof of transfer. Sounds simple and like a secretary's job, right? She actually said she didn't want to do it and someone else should do it. I told her that was sort of like a firefighter who didn't like to fight fires, a chef who didn't like to cook, a programmer who didn't use computers, a taxi driver who hates driving, etc. The real kicker comes when we had an audit on our company, and while we were having a meeting with the auditors, she was blaring the music at a loud volume. We asked her nicely to turn it down because the auditors couldn't hear us, and her response was, "You can just shout." We had to apologize to them for her behavior. Later that same day, while we were showing the auditors our company, and came back in the afternoon, we found the whole office empty, door unlocked, and lights on. She was nowhere to be found and never came back that afternoon, not even a note saying where she had gone. And all this happened in less than 3 weeks. Some bad press about the stickers part, but it really isn't as bad as it sounds. Here's the explanation of it I gave to another commenter. Oh, I was doing her a favor actually by finding another way to get her to stop complaining as to lower her job performance evaluation, as I am not the direct guy in charge of her. They were just small stickers you would put on a calendar to mark holidays, etc., and she bought a few of them. Yes, they were even her stickers. I got the first one in by being sneaky and announced every time she complained, I would stick one on her face. And later when she would complain, I would very audibly sigh, get up from my seat, and walk over to her and stick one on. She would just take them off immediately and stick them to her desk though. First afternoon, about 6, 7 stickers. After that, it was like only 2 per half day, so I guess it sort of worked. Sometimes she would complain and I would give her a chance and ask, "What did you just say?" And she would repeat it, and then I had no choice but to stick one on her. How did I get away with it? I'm charming and she thought it was funny, not bullying and just a joke. Story 15. At the time, I headed up a web development team of 7, and one guy was always a bit creepy, but quite a nice guy. We used IRC a lot to discuss web development problems in the Freenode community and to progress development. But I have to admit, this guy seemed to be on there quite a bit more than everyone else. One day, walking past him at his desk, I noticed the old quick minimize going on as he turned his chat window down, which immediately caught my attention. So after that, I logging on his micro and waiting a few days. Turns out he wasn't really working on web dev bits on IRC, but having really explicit sex with a girl online. That was not an easy conversation to keep a straight face for. Story 16. I'm not saying construction workers are some crafty people, because everyone on my family is a construction worker. You have tradesmen, then you have guys that show up at these big sites to work months or only weeks at a time. Every other year or so, we have to hire a lot of temporary workers for temporary plant shutdowns. Most of the time, half of them leave when you hand them the piss cup for the substances test. So we had a new batch in. A lot of guys come to work in groups. 3 or 4 of them ride together, and if you fire one of them, you lose all of them, because that is their only ride. Anyway, one new group comes in. They've been working a couple days, and one of them, Jim, is talking to my brother. He tells my brother about his 3-year-old daughter. She has some kind of brain tumor and is in and out of the hospital. She has a slew of health problems and isn't expected to live a long life. My brother had a daughter the same age at that time. The guy is pretty tore up talking about her and shows my brother all his pictures he carries in his wallet, talks about all the different hospitals she's been in and out of, the different type of specialists she has to see, etc. Pretty sad stuff. You hate to hear about a child suffering so much. Fast forward 2 or 3 days. One of the guys that rides with Jim has laid out of work. He shows up one morning and my brother's like, "Where the hell have you been?" The dude is like, "Man, I'm sorry for not calling, but my daughter has brain cancer and I had to take her to the ER." "What?" My brother looks at me. "Did you hear that? I do the bookwork." I had the guy's W-2. Single. No dependents. He calls Jim over. So we got Jim and the liar there together. My brother looked at them and said, "Whichever one of you two doesn't have a sick daughter, grab your crap and get the duck out of here." Jim looks perplexed for a second, but the other guy just turned around and picked his crap up and left without saying another word. We gave Jim the benefit of the doubt because he seemed really sincere, and the information he gave us about his daughter seemed pretty credible. But the sad thing is, we run up on some pretty worthless human beings, and the crap you hear, basically, we had a worker, Jim, that had a sick daughter. Jim's friend rode to work with Jim. Jim's friend skipped work for a few days, and when he returned, lied about missing work by claiming that he had a sick, dying daughter, describing Jim's daughter's medical problems as his reason for missing several days of work. I knew the guy was lying because I had done all his paperwork and knew he was single with no kids. So my brother called Jim over, and this is how it broke down. He basically says, "Jim told me last week he has a daughter that is dying, and then to Jim's friend, you just missed 3 days of work because you say you have a daughter that is dying and has the same ailments Jim says his daughter has. So he says whoever doesn't have a sick daughter, get the duck out because he is a lying piece of crap." This is when Jim realized that his friend is using his story of his sick, dying daughter as his own to cover his ass from missing work. Sorry, mate. Prob made it worse. I just get so mad thinking about that ducker lying about missing work by claiming his friend's sad situation as his own for missing work. Story 17. I had to fire someone for doing her. It was seriously the most ducked up nonsense. I was a manager at a hotel near an airport, and we were woefully understaffed for a hotel of our size, almost 200 rooms, thousands of square feet of banquet space, one desk agent on duty at any time. I made a strict do not leave the desk policy because corporate was anal about the phone being answered on or before the second ring without exception. We didn't have a cordless phone, so someone had to be right by the phone at all times. Our director of sales came down one day and asked my newest hire to go find me. My agent, bless her heart, explained that she couldn't leave the desk and corporate instituted a no cell phones in the building policy, so there was no way of reaching me while I was doing a security sweep. Apparently, my desk agent staunchly refused and told the director of sales where I might be and that she could find me herself. The next day, I came into 4 emails and a voicemail from the president of our company saying that our director of sales had lodged a formal complaint of insubordination against the new girl and had given an ultimatum that either the new girl gets fired or the dose quits. The dose was phenomenal at selling and brought in millions of dollars in new contracts in under 3 months of being there. So I either had to terminate her immediately or I would be replaced. Worst, firing ever. We were both confused and angry, but I had to remain stern and boss-like while escorting her off the property, and then was told to never hire inflexible people ever again, or they would replace me. I quit that job a month later. Story 18. I wasn't the boss at the time, but I was one of the cooks. The assistant general manager was one of the nicest guys around, so fun to work with. As a cook got a percentage of the sales as a tip every second Friday. Opposite our paychecks, kind of like a mini paycheck, it was nice. They would hold on to them for 3 months after you started, and if you stayed there, if them to you in a big bulk amount. Awesome. But when it came around out my turn, I got about $150. Wasn't aware at the time, but I was young and stoked on $150. 2 weeks later, I get another one and it was 60. I was like, if I got 60 after 2 weeks, how does 3 months get me 150? The AGM was stealing all our tips, not just the first one either, half or so of our bi-weekly ones. Buying a crap ton of Coke, stealing the branch's money too, ended up owing somewhere upwards 60 grand ducking. Story 19. Had an employee who was doing really well in sales and recruiting. I kept getting calls from former employees saying they never received their checks. It turns out he had stolen 7 of them from my office and signed them over to himself by forging their signatures. Story 20. I had to fire a fellow employee for stealing everyone's tips and leaving them only a few dollars. Thought that was pretty ducking annoying of her to do. She was the youngest and most spoiled girl. We had employees who actually needed every penny they could get. Story 21. I didn't fire him, but I think there is a lesson to be learned here. I want to share. We own an engineering firm in Atlanta and hired a 19-year-old intern from Georgia Tech. He lived in his fraternity house and often showed up late and hungover, but was a nice kid. One Monday and Tuesday, he didn't show up and we assumed he was hungover and sleeping it off. It then occurred to me that we sort of had an obligation to check on him in case he was truly missing. We called his cell phone and didn't get an answer or a return call. We then checked with the intern office at the school and they had no information. I was on the verge of tracking down his parents when we finally heard from him. It turns out he had gotten a DUI on Friday night, and rather than call his parents to bail him out, he called some friends. The friends spent the next 4 days trying to bail him out of Fulton County Jail, when he was actually in DeKalb County Jail, not a place any 19-year-old college student wants to spend any time. It's about a 10-story, windowless building filled with really nasty people. The friends finally figured it out and bailed him out. Also, in the meantime, we found lots of adult history on his computer as we were trying to get clues as to whether he was okay or missing. He showed up, apologized, and asked to keep his job. I agreed with the condition that from that point on, he call his parents instead of his dumbass friends if he got in any more trouble. And I let a man in our office talk to him about his adult film use at work. Story 22. This girl kept calling in sick randomly around 3-4 shifts a month. She'd always make different excuses. My car broke down, I have the flu, blah, blah, blah. Well, this one night she said she was in the hospital for some infection. A few of us went for drinks after work to watch the hockey game, and there she was, on TV, on the Kiss Cam in a city 1,200 kilometers away. When she came back to work 4 days later, I made small talk about her hospital visit. She made up some stories. Then I said, "Hey, take a look at this. Doesn't this look like you and your husband?" And showed her a YouTube clip one of the guys cut from his PVR. Story 23. We were super tight about overtime, yet there was a crapload of work to get done. To make himself look good, the night shift supervisor would let guys stay late, but then go into the system and take off some of their overtime hours. He was careful to not do too much, so it took longer than you would think for one of the guys to question their pay. We fired him and walked him out before we told anyone. The third shift crew was pretty rough, so who knows what they would have done to that guy. This was a long time ago, so I would assume most software has some auditing built in to catch this kind of stuff now. Story 24. Not me, but my girlfriend's younger sister got the elementary school computer teacher fired for showing up drunk to class and started talking to 5th graders about her substances abuse. Story 25. I was once laid off for 7 weeks from a very good high-paying job because someone who looked like me was accused of being a pervert. We had 2 gyms on site, on ladies and 1 dudes. I was one of the only men with long hair that worked there, almost the only one. There was a dude who, oddly enough, wore the same clothes and had the same hairstyle, was caught on tape spying in the girls' locker room. They let the esteemed engineer keep his job while the young 20-something, me, took it on the chin. After explaining myself over and over again, and that it couldn't have possibly been me, other people openly spoke about how there's no way I could have been in 2 places at once. They brought me back on. Defending myself for being a perverted duck to high-level corporate legal and HR was somewhat humiliating. I got my job back and kept it for another 6 months, then got laid off, fired in a way that allowed me to collect for 18 months. Story 26. Stupid git asked for parental leave, supposedly a right in Canada, because his newborn daughter had serious complications, was not thriving, and wife could not cope. He put in his formal request as per the law, fired the next day. Oh, snap, that was me. Duck you, Radio Works. ACA, Story 27. I worked as human resources manager in a large department store in downtown DC. One day I was in the security office when I saw what the agents were watching. I almost crapped myself. A huge man had come in. I mean, he was almost 7 feet tall, easily 300 pounds. He is wandering around acting strange, but not doing anything substantial enough to warrant getting rid of him. He walked over to the men's department and picked up a belt. He then approached the associate standing behind the counter. While he is standing there, he is whipping the belt up and down. By this time, a couple of the security guys had positioned themselves nearby. As he gets to the counter, he says something to the associate. She is maybe 5'2", 100 selb. All of a sudden, he reaches over the counter and starts trying to beat her with the belt. The closest agent jumps on him. This guy too looks like a hobbit compared to him, but he manages to get him backed up against a glass column, and they get him cuffed. Meanwhile, the girl he was beating comes over and tries to leap up and slap him. She is so little, you can't tell if she even reached his face. Cops come, he's taken away. The whole thing is on video. Next thing you know, law students from one of the schools in town get involved. They see the video. Turns out I have to fire the poor little girl because she slapped him when he was cuffed. I personally wanted to take a Louisville Slugger to the guy. That day made me sick. Story 28. I was working for a crafty medical claims processing company a few years back. I had one employee who, I honestly don't know what the duck she was thinking half the time. I don't think she put any thought into what she did on a day-to-day basis. We had a policy because of her that you were not allowed to eat at your desk. She continued to eat at her desk. We actually went through her desk and found half a pizza that had grown moldy. The office had begun to smell weird for a while. And lo and behold, that's where it was coming from. She was promptly written up, and the following day, when she clocked on 45 minutes late, sat down and ate her breakfast at her desk without giving a moment's thought of actually starting to work. We noticed a new picture of her son was on her desk. We knew she was very proud of her son, but the picture was anything but appropriate for work. In what seemed to be a very nice frame was a picture of her 30-year-old live-at-home son, who was cross-dressing. When releasing her, I asked why she thought it was appropriate to have such a picture of her son at work. She replied that she was very proud of her son for living so openly. I asked why she would have a picture of her son and display it at work. She actually said, and I'm quoting, "There are some very lovely young ladies here, and they would be lucky to be with a stallion like my son." Shock. My manager and I were simply shocked. My manager stepped in and simply said, "We're going to have to let you go." The worker was furious and threatened to sue for wrongful termination. We brought her to her desk and began packing her stuff. We had taken the picture into the office for the termination, and she actually grabbed the picture and put it back on the desk. I asked what she was doing. That picture needs to leave with her, and she said, "Well, I was just thinking that someone might want to contact my son. I was going to leave his number here. Is that okay?" No, she was terminated and left without much fuss. Interestingly, someone had printed out a picture of her son and posted it in the bathroom with a "for a good time called" the note attached. I actually thought that was rather funny, although I couldn't tell any of the people I worked with. Story 29. Okay, I'm not a boss, but this happened in a place I worked at, and I witnessed it firsthand. I used to work at a supermarket as a cashier. One day, as another cashier was leaving work, he was also a good friend, walked to his car, only to discover his tires slashed. The supermarket had an extensive security system with cameras everywhere. So my friend walked back in and told my manager what happened. They go back to check the tapes, and right there on camera is another employee slashing my friend's tires. They immediately remove the employee from the register he was working at and bring him in the back room to question. They show him the videotape, and he denies it. They were all completely blown away. This guy was not only caught red-handed, shown the evidence, but he then proceeded to deny it. He obviously was fired immediately. Story 30. Working in a call center, B2B high-tech focus, so not too terrible. Lots of good people, better than expected, etc. We have this head of sales who is very country club looking. Super white and wasp handsome, if you know what I mean. Very buddy-buddy with everyone, especially the woman in the office. Lots of us thought there was something a bit off with him, but no one could ever point a finger at what it was. We have full-time call recording on all lines in the building and have a dedicated team tasked with doing QA for the call team, i.e., listening to calls and checking data. No one is supposed to listen to managers' calls, though, except for the owner. It is possible to manually listen in if you want. One day, the QA team comes to us with a file or a CD, can't remember which, and tells us to listen for a bit. Starts off as a bit of a boring conversation between someone who is obviously the head of sales and a woman we don't recognize. The call quickly becomes something a bit more, and in no time, it full-blown phone sex. A bit weird, but not so bad, right? Turns out this is just one of many calls, all with different women, all auditioned. He was running recruiting for adult shoots about half of every day when he was supposed to be getting us new clients. Turned out he even convinced one or two of the staff to take part. The girls that first found out hadn't known what to do, they say, and had been listening all week and making recordings. After a bit of convincing, they finally took the recordings to one of the higher-ups who must have shat his pants when he found out what was going on. Management was very old school, and this was way too much for them to handle. You could hear our president screaming at him throughout the building. Apparently, the sales guy started crying and begging for them on tell his wife. He was never seen again, not even online. How could I not look? Story 31. Our summer camp director had to fire one of our employees because he was recording little girls getting changed for the swimming pool. The guy was like barely 18. Story 32. Bean counters said I couldn't fire a man just for being in a wheelchair. Did it anyway. Ramps are expensive. For those who don't get it, is a reference from the game Portal 2, where Cave Johnson, the boss of Aperture, said such quote in one of the phases of the game. So no, I have not fired anyone since I'm not even a boss. Story 33. Guy at my work was hired through a temp agency. He worked really hard, met qualifications, and had a great personality. He and his wife and 5 dogs slept in a van that looked like it was from the 70s. This guy smelled worse than a dead corpse. He wore the exact same clothes every day. One of my employees said that they saw him bathing in the river in the city. Every few days he would crap his pants at work. We liked him and wanted him to stay, but our employee handbook has fairly simple hygiene requirements that he didn't meet at all. We gave him a care package of shampoo and soap and crap. Didn't help. We had to let him go. Weeks since then, his chair that he sat on still smelled like utter crap, so we had to retire that too. Story 34. I was not the boss, but I was told this by my boss. A man and a woman were working in our call center, and they were sending each other an abundance of emails back and forth about the things that they had done together in our employee bathroom. They were apparently pretty graphic in the details. Well, one of them accidentally sent the entire email thread to a customer who later called in to report this. They were walked out immediately. Story 35. I wasn't the boss, but we had a girl get fired for bringing a dead bird in a paper bag into the building. She was doing it to get revenge on some girl who started dating her friend. Dead bird girl set them up in the first place. It wasn't just that she brought in a dead bird, it was that she recorded the event and her target's reaction and emailed it to the company, including the CEO. Story 36. This happened to me. I was young and dumb. I was in college and my comp sci professor pulled me into his office and offered me an IT job at a bank. Thing was, the bank was 30 miles away. At the time I was working for Subway and jumped on it. The first few weeks were great, but then the price gas shot up. I was only working 20 to 25 hours a week, but it was 4 hours a day and I was only getting paid $7 an hour. It started costing me more money to go to work than I was making. So I started riding the clock to get extra hours in. We had recently applied an update to the system that had changed some bookkeeping codes and some Git kept using the old set. And every time he did, I would have to call the president of it to remote and to fix the error. I was always the last one to leave because I had to do end-of-day processing on the ACE 400 mainframe. This particular night, I had procreated a bit longer to get more hours. It was 10:30 at night before I started the processing sequence. I ran into the error. I didn't want to call the boss because it was really late, so after some quick deliberation, I ignored it. Everything printed out fine, all the reports, and closed successfully. I dropped off the system backups and went home. Came in the next day and my login doesn't work. Being in it, I knew what that meant. What I didn't know is that I shut down the bank and all its branches for a day. Including everyone's debit and ATM cards, I was fired. Story 37. I am not a boss, but I once got a guy for it. The backstory is that I lived 70 miles away from work, and this guy lived very close to me, so we would carpool to save money on gas. He was the most annoying coworker ever and was extremely rude. We were going through training, and he had this arrogance about him that the trainers hated as well as his coworkers. He always thought he knew more about whatever the topic was than the experts. He was the 5'3", gray-toothed, bald Middle-Ages guy who drove a bright orange car and believed he and his wife were wolves. He was absolutely conceived that he turned into a wolf at times. So one day we are driving home, and the highlights of the conversation were him asking me to come to a club with him and his wife, him commenting on my boobs, and then him ultimately telling me that I should be an escort and I would make more money at that than at our current job. I ended up reporting him to our management, and they were absolutely thrilled to have a reason to fire him, since they couldn't just fire him for being a douche. When he got fired, he really had no idea as to why. Stupid guy. Story 38. We forgot to tell her she was fired, so she showed up to cover someone's shift after not working for 2 months. Well, she wasn't employed here anymore, so I pulled her in the office and fired her. When she asked why, I said, because you don't work here anymore. I thought she should have been told, but I didn't have firing authority, so I couldn't let her know. She also never came to check her schedule after the first week of not being on it. When my GM instructed me to let her go, I did, and almost lost my job for listening to her. Story 39. I had a staff member that was late frequently. On his third late offense, I fired him. His excuse that time was that he got caught on the toilet with a never-ending poop. So I fired someone for a long Tuesday. Story 40. Did not fire her, but gave a written warning to a female employee for exposing her breast and adjusting her nipple ring in front of a male employee. Story 41. As a restaurant manager, I once had to let go a young hostess who followed a family into the parking lot, berating them over a tip. She was not the server. She was the hostess. Turns out, she had a crush on the waiter who served them and, in an effort to impress him, followed them out the door. She's letting him have it while he's backing out of the parking spot, and he just pulls back into the spot, comes back in and asks for the manager, me. What then transpired was me being the unfortunate recipient of a barrage of "how dare yous" and outrage-laden tirade. He was right. The guy left a tip. It wasn't a great tip, but still tipped, between 12 to 15 if I remember. The waiter was dumbfounded. He assured me he didn't put her up to it, and I did believe him. She asked the waiter what they tipped in passing. The hostess made it easy for me. After the customer left, she came to the office and goes, "I'm fired, I guess." I used the pretend you're me method of putting her on the outside of watching her own behavior. She knew. Story 42. Spiking my full throttle with vodka while I was taking inventory. I didn't remember opening it, but I figured I had and downed it. I'm a lightweight, so I got the pleasure of calling and explaining to my district manager that I was unable to run my store because I was drunk. No one believed me. My assistant had to come and run the shift, and I was seriously sitting in the lobby waiting for my last check to arrive, since I couldn't drive yet, when my DM caught my opener swigging Popov vodka in the walk-in fridge. I was vindicated and got the pleasure of firing the ducker drunk. Story 43. I was not a boss, but I used to work overnight cashier in a 24-hour grocery store about 20 years ago. We were in a bad area of town with a lot of shoplifting, so they installed the Sensormatic machines that would pick this wire that we put on the high theft items. This was pretty new tech at the time, not like now where they are at the exit of every store. We had them at each of the registers, so that once you passed the pay area, if you had not paid for it, it was shoplifting. We would actually put the wire strips on the products ourselves at the store. Well, one of the stalkers is on his lunch break and sets the alarm as he purchases his food through my register. Turns out he has a bunch of stuff in his pockets. He was begging and pleading not to tell anyone, but everyone already knew. Then it turned to threats. Police came. He was fired. His wife also worked at that store, so I was forever getting dirty looks from her as long as I worked there. The stupid part was he puts those strips on the products himself, so it's not like he did not know they were there or how to peel them off. Story 44. Chronic open sewer BO. This ducktard actually thought it was totally natural to not shower at all. We worked in a food retail baking setting. This dude would skateboard or bike to work, throw on his work jersey and hit the floor stinking of ass and garbage, and then would proceed to actually sweat through the whole shebang. The problem was that none of the other folks on the team had the sack to stand up to him about his funk. But it was so bad that scheduling people to work with him was like everybody losing the same lottery. But he'd worked there for a long time, prior to me taking over the team, and thought he crapped Tiffany cufflinks or something. So this came out as a huge issue with the team about a week after I started as the boss. We also had a fairly strict corporate disciplinary policy to follow, so I more or less just whisked him through the warnings phase and finally canned his foul ass after a customer asked if there were burning tires somewhere in my bakery. And my staff more or less carried me around on a sedan chair for about a month after that. Story 45. I wasn't the boss. This happened to someone on my team. My very first day at work, I got a call from the guy who apparently sat at the desk behind me. He said he was too hungover to come into work, but if anyone asked, I saw him that morning and he'd left again for a meeting. Naturally, I didn't do this when asked, and the other team member told me that after a recent restructure, this guy had been put into a position he hated, and she thought he was just trying to get fired for the payout. A few weeks after that, he was fired, after it found his hard drive was full of adult images, with the heads of his colleagues badly photoshopped onto them. It seemed he spent his time wandering around the office, surreptitiously snapping shots of us all, then the rest of the time, creating this creepy art collection. Story 46. My partner convinced me to agree to hire one of his friends to work in our bike shop. We had about a dozen employees at the time. No biggie. The guy seemed okay and basically knowledgeable. Well, some stuff started to turn up missing. We got a bike or 3 with missing parts. Very odd. One day it was just he and I in the shop during opening. I took in a bike, checked it, and gave it to the new guy to build up. I go get a cup of coffee next door and come back to hear that yet another part was missing from a brand new bike still in its box. I just said, "Bullcrap, you're fired. GTFO." I don't know if he was greedy, desperate, or stupid, but he stole from me and tried to treat me like an idiot. Not a good move. Story 47. I didn't get fired, but I worked telephone tech support for DirecTV. We are required to run through all our troubleshooting steps before sending a tech as a last resort. If we didn't, it was grounds for instant firing. I got a call, and the guy told me he mowed over his satellite cable, and it was now in 2 pieces. He was getting a 771 error message, which means that the receiver was not communicating with the dish, or the dish was not getting signal from the satellite in space. Obviously, he cut his cable in half, so that was the problem. I sent out a tech without troubleshooting. A week later, they called me in, and my boss had to talk down his boss from firing me for not having the customer reset the cable box or mess with the position of the dish on the roof. I mean, the cable was in 2 ducking pieces. They finally agreed to put me on final notice, and if I so much as sneezed, I would get canned. I took that as a sign to start looking for a new job. Story 48. One time, I worked as an assistant manager at a gym with a base of 4,000 members at the location alone. Well, they had tanning beds in the club. You were only allowed to go in and tan every other day. Well, this one employee would always want to go tanning on his break. Funny thing is, he would never get more tanned. Well, after this went on for a few weeks and he was still as white as a ghost, I asked him, "Man, you tan so much, but I don't see any more tan on you. Are all the bulbs all right?" He told me, "Yeah, everything is fine. No worries." Well, later I found out he was going into the laundry room and grabbing some dirty towels members had dropped off at the front desk that are just about to be washed. He would take them into the tanning room and, smell them and pleasure with the towels. He could smell all the members at once. He broke down when confronted about it. Needless to say, I no longer use public anything. Just a side note, this employee was already on the staff when I was hired. I had a bad feeling about this guy. Story 49. I wasn't a boss or manager, but I was a witness that resulted in a superior being fired. I worked in media in Best Buy when the Nintendo Wii came out. A female supervisor from another department told me to stash a Wii for her to buy later. I was fairly new, so I did as she asked. A few days later, I got called into the admin office and questioned about the incident. 30 minutes later, I watched as she was escorted out of the store, glaring at me through red, teary eyes every step of the way. Story 50. Got hired on as a temp for a large company. My temp team was slated to be added permanently to the company, so everyone was sucking a hole to make sure it happened. One such gentleman decided to be a father leader to the team. Total douche, but he was harmless enough. Later, we found out we were going to be made permanent and this guy was asked to join us. He didn't show up to the orientation, then we found out that he had been fired. The reason? He was awaiting trial for repeatedly assaulting Story 51. Not mine, but my dad's story. We live in Australia and are South Africa, immigrants. My dad owns a factory that does manufacturing. A couple years into setting up the business, he came home and was so happy. He told us that he just hired his first Aboriginal employee, a man who seemed very friendly and bright. He was proud because he felt like he was contributing to Australian society by hiring this Aboriginal man, not only because of his race, but also based on his merits. For Are Not Australia, Aborigines are the natives here in Australia and have a long history of substance abuse and socioeconomic disadvantages. Anyway, a couple says later, my dad came home and was upset because the Aboriginal bloke didn't come into work and didn't call in. A few days later, my dad got a call from the police. Turns out that the guy had gone to jail for abuse and beating up his girlfriend. My dad was heartbroken, and it made him very sad for quite a long time. Needless to say, the guy was fired. Story 52. I was a low-level manager at a national grocery store chain. I had to bring one of my department's employees, great kid, to the store manager's office to put him on a final warning for his attendance. While in the office, the store manager asked him why he was late so often, and he told us it was because he had a medical disorder in which he would frequently become dizzy and unable to stand and walk. He would be late when he had episodes. I already knew this, and he was telling the truth. Unfortunately, his job involved nonstop standing and walking, so my manager told him that he would have to get a doctor's note assuring the company that he was physically capable of doing the job safely, which he was of course not able to get. He was terminated. I've seen him several times since. He got another job and he doesn't blame me or even the company, but that definitely ruined my week. Definitely the first time I was involved in firing someone who had literally done nothing wrong. He was a really great worker. This incident led to me ultimately quitting that job a few months later. Story 53. Oh, I have a messed up story. I worked with a nice, quiet guy in his late 20s at a major farm company. He did his work well, his coworkers liked him, and he never treated anyone badly. But someone from another department went to college with him and said he used to stare at women before he dropped out. This got back to the guy, and he explained that he was on medics at the time and was embarrassed by that period in college. But people from another subgroup of his research department wouldn't let it go. So management went through all his personal contacts, old supervisors, professors, etc., and found nothing damning. Then, The one creepy department head started monitoring his internet usage and his smartphone through his Wi-Fi and text conversations and still found nothing. But by this point, everyone was so fed up with all this hand-wringing nonsense by management and the one sub-department that they laid him off anyways. Story 54. I was a shift manager for a fast food company with ridiculous rules. If an employee wore white socks to work, it was a write-up. If an employee didn't wear their name tag or the exact company-issued belt, it was a write-up. If they didn't talk the way the company wanted you to talk, it was a write-up. They had a very specific set of rules in regards to what you could or could not say. Yes was not allowed. You had to say absolutely or I'd be delighted, which I would expect from employees of the Ritz-Carlton or something. I mean, at other fast foods restaurants, you're lucky if you get your order right and it's hot. At 3 write-ups, you started looking at termination. In essence, I had to deprive people of their livelihood because they wore white socks 3 times or because they said yes or you're welcome too frequently. At least it was a good motivator to finish college and get the hell out of the fast food industry as quickly as possible. Story 55. The worst reason I've heard was my boyfriend's dad's excuse for firing an employee. He fired him because his wife had cancer and he knew he would be missing a lot of work. Story 56. Former department store bakery manager. Here, most notable employee I remember was a young guy who wanted to see how many frozen bagels and frozen donuts he could put around his penis, like a ring. Apparently, he can fit 5 donuts or 3 bagels. Don't give the guy too much credit. They were frozen and very small compared to the end product. I know this because he not only took pictures of the deed in question, but sent me these pictures, assuming I'd laugh about it just as much as he did. We had to throw 2 damn boxes of frozen dough out that night, and I needed to come in at midnight and do a fresh pan up. I told the store director, who was more furious than I was. The dumb git was fired via a phone call and had his last paycheck mailed to him because no one wanted him to come back into the store. A pro tip? Never assume you share a sense of humor with your boss. And don't duck pastries, I guess. Story 57. I ran a crew of canvassers that would go door to door setting home improvement estimates. They were to set the lead from the porch and never enter a customer's home. Well, I had one employee who was a very sneaky girl, but she was good at her job, so my boss always kept her around when I would let her go. One day, we were working in a very nice neighborhood, and she called me frantic to pick her up because she just threw up and was very sick. Later that day, my company got a phone call from a very unhappy homeowner who stated that a young woman knocked on her door, begged and pleaded to use her bathroom because she thinks she just had a miscarriage. While the employee was in the bathroom, she stole medication out of the bathroom, her husband's Rolex watch, and over $1,000 cash in a dresser drawer. Needless to say, this time my firing stuck and that trash wasn't allowed back. Story 58. One woman reported that a co-worker supposedly stole Vicodin out of her purse. Vicodin she herself was not prescribed and had stolen it from someone else. She was required to take a substances test. She refused, so we had to fire her. 2. Another woman always seemed to be sick on Friday or Monday. Found out she was forging doctor's notes from all over town. Was a no-call, no-show for 3 days. Owner called to tell her she was no longer employed, and the woman shows up a week later, screaming at everyone because we fired her while she was in jail, so how could she make a phone call? And all of these women were in their 40s. I've had better young employees. Story 59. I worked at a moving company for a few summers. I worked in the warehouse with a bunch of older black guys. One day it was about 100 degrees outside, and there wasn't much to do. This one guy falls asleep in a chair while the rest of us were talking around the desk. Boss man comes in to tell us a truck was going to be here in an hour. As he was walking out the warehouse, he stops and sees this guy sleeping. I ask if he wants me to wake him up. He looks directly at me and says, "Nah, let him sleep. When he wakes up, tell him he's fired." When the truck got there, homeboy wakes up to start working, and I'm like, "Boss, man says you're fired." But he might have just been ducking around. The guy went into the office and never came back. I still laugh whenever I think about it. Nah, let him sleep. Story 60. I work at a truck dealership, and one of our customers bought 4 brand new trucks and hired 4 guys to drive them. 3 were new, but 1 had worked for him before. Anyway, the one had really let himself go and had such a fierce stink to him that you could actually estimate how far you were from him by the strength of the funk. He left such a stink lingering in that truck that it couldn't be rotated to other drivers. So the owner brought it in to be sterilized and fired the guy. We replaced the seat and the sleeper mattress and left an ozone generator in the cab for a weekend. Still slightly funky, but an air freshener could cover it up. A year later, he rehired the driver because he started bathing again. Yay, happy ending. Except that 3 months later, he was fired again for the same reason. Owner got rid of the truck. Yay, happy ending. Story 61. I used to work in the shipping department of a medical supply company. All of our local orders were delivered in person by a guy we hired specifically to make the deliveries. He had been working for us, making the rounds to our usual customers for about 2 years. We got a call one day from the police department about some complaints that had been registered against him by a female employee at one of the hospitals he delivered to. The complaints were of a harassment nature, vulgar comments, lightly brushing against legs, etc. When confronting the employee, we found a notebook in the delivery van that chronicled all of his various advances towards women he made deliveries to. We also found multiple pictures of obese women in skirts and pantyhose. His journal was named Skirts and Hose. All of the women in the journal were described as being big mamas with thick pantyhose-covered legs. Story 62. Not me, but my mother's boss at the animal hospital where she works had to fire a vet and a vet tech after they got into a fistfight in the surgery room and broke a window. I believe it started when the tech called the vet's girlfriend an escort. Story 63. My high school best friend's fiance worked as a cook at a restaurant. Someone in my family owned for a while. He ended up with scabies. My relative offered to take him to the doctor, pay for any treatment, and give him paid leave while all of this was happening. Dude said no. Now he has no job and scabies.